Hey, it's your tutor Courtney Waterman, lover of anime, manga, and math. And this is another session of Tutor Me Senpai. Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to be jumping into our fourth grade topic called long division. If you have any questions about what you see today, remember you can put them in the comment box below. If you have any questions about your own homework, remember you can always visit me on Facebook at Tutor Me Senpai and tell me all about it there. If you find this video helpful, remember to leave a like. It really helps the channel. And while you're at it, remember to hit the notification bell and smash the subscribe button so you know exactly when I drop my next videos. But without further ado, let's talk a little bit more about long division. So before we jump into our question for today, let's talk about a few things that'll help us get started on the right foot. So the first thing is you should probably know what the pieces are called. So whenever you have any kind of division, whether long division or not, you have these three things. You have a divisor, you have a dividend, and you have a quotient. Now, the quotient is just the answer. How many times does something go into something else? Well, whatever that answer is, we call that the quotient. The dividend is whatever you're going into. So for example, let's say you wanted to take 100 and you want to see how many times does 5 go into 100. Or you want to say 100 divided by 5. Well, 100 would be the dividend, right? So whatever you are dividing. And a divisor would be whatever you're dividing by. So in that same example, 100 divided by 5, 5 would be your divisor. So divisor being whatever you're dividing by, the dividend being whatever you're dividing, and the quotient being the answer. Another thing you should probably know is how it looks. So let's say we had that 100 divided by 5. Well, long division uses this thing that looks like a half box, right? I say half because we don't really fill in the rest of the box here. So it's like a half box. And inside the box is where we put our dividend. So 100 would go here. Outside the box is where we put our divisor. And the quotient ends up being on top. So however many times 5 goes into 100 would go up here. So this is the form that your long division will come in. You have this half box. Inside that box or half box would be our dividend. Outside would be our divisor. And the quotient, our answer, will simply lie on top. Another thing that would be helpful to know is your multiplication table. Now, this is not necessary to know. You don't have to remember all of it, but things become significantly easier if you are very comfortable with your multiplication table. Now, like I said, you don't have to commit all of it to memory because you can always add things and you'll get your answer eventually. But if you remember your multiplication table, you can bypass a lot of work and just kind of directly put things in. So I would say make sure you practice your multiplication table. If you don't practice that, long division will get a lot more complicated, a lot more steps, a lot more places you could potentially mess up. So if you get this down, it saves a lot of work, a lot of headache for you in the future. So try your best to learn your multiplication table. Another thing that I thought of that could potentially help you is understanding that division kind of subscribes to the idea of getting close to a number, but never passing it. Now you can hit the number, that's great, but you should never pass the number you're dividing by. And it might seem counterintuitive. However, it'll make a lot more sense once we get into how we're actually doing long division, but try to keep in the back of your mind, you want to get really close to a number, but you don't want to pass that number. So if this is your number here, you want to stop here, but don't go past the number. We don't want to go past the number. So like I said, that might not make much sense now, but as we work in our question for today, you'll see what I mean. Division is all about getting close to the number, stopping at your number if you can, but never going past it. Another thing that would be helpful to know is just a set of steps that you can kind of try to follow along and make sure you're not missing anything whenever you're doing long division. So these are going to be the steps that are going to guide you in your long division process. The first one being figuring out what you're dividing. Then you're going to have some multiplication is going to play a role. And after the multiplication is done, there will be some subtracting. So if you ever go from multiplication to pull down, then you might need to figure out, hey, do I need to do some subtracting? After subtracting, we go to pull down. And then if there's anything left to do, we're going to repeat. If there isn't, we're done. So one more thing I wanted to tell you before we jump into our example is the idea of a remainder. You know that 20 is a multiple of 5, right? If you did your multiplication table, you see that 5, when you multiply it by 4, gives us 20. So if I said I wanted to divide 20 by 5, there is no remainder. 20 is a multiple of 5, so it goes into it evenly. However, 21 is not a multiple of 5, right? The closest we can get without going over. Remember the idea of we don't want to ever go over the number that we're trying to divide. We want to stop just before the number or hit the number. So in this case, if we were to divide 21 by 5, we're going to have something called a remainder. And we normally write it something like this. And this is only because I know the answer, but once you're actually doing long division, you'll see it pan out. So this will be 4 with a remainder of 1. That remainder doesn't show up here because R is actually 0. There is no remainder here, so we don't even bother writing it. But whenever we have something that's bigger than 0, you gotta let them know that there's a remainder. We don't go directly into 21 because 21 is not a multiple of 5. 20 is, so there's no remainder. 21 isn't, so there is going to be a remainder. So when dealing with multiples, you won't have a remainder, but if you're ever dealing with something that isn't a multiple, you might have a remainder. So just be aware there might be some leftover work. So a quick example before we jump into our question for today, just to see how things pan out and make sure we're understanding the rules, is something like this. So we have our dividend being 123, our divisor being 5, and we want to find how many times does 5 go into 123. And we're going to put our quotient up here. So when doing long division, we want to start from our leftmost number. So you see this is the far left inside our box, and then focus on the numbers one at a time going to the right. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So if you're trying to figure out how many times does 5 go into 123, we first look at 1. So we look at 1. And remember our steps. So our first step says divide. We have to figure out what we're going to divide. And we're going to focus on our first number, 1. So we're going to see how many times does 5 go into 1. So we're going to divide 1 by 5. And you see that it doesn't go into that. We can't make 5 go into 1. The closest thing we can do is get 0, right? Because if you know your multiplication table, 5 is bigger than 1. So the first thing that we can get, and the only thing close to it, would be when we're having this 0 number here. So we're going to put 0 on top of our box directly above the first number in the box. And that's how we're going to be using the long division. Whenever we're trying to find out what we can use to divide, that number goes directly on top of the number we're focusing on. So now our first step is finished. We figured out what we're going to divide, and we realized, hey, we can't actually get that close to it. The only thing we can do is get a little bit less using 0. Next is multiply. We take this number and we multiply it by our divisor. So what is 0 times 5? Well, that's going to be 0. And then we take that result and put it under our first number. And then we're subtracting, our third step. What's 1 minus 0? Well, that's just 1. And then we do our pull down. We pull down the very next number. Remember, we're going from left to right, one at a time. We first focused on 1, now we focus on 2. We take 2 and we pull it down. Now we have 12. We're going to repeat because we have more to work with. So we go back to the top. Divide. Well, we're going to be trying to figure out how many times does 5 go into 12 now, right? So we figured out what we're going to divide. We're going to divide 12 by 5. So our first step is done, right? How many times does 12 go into 5? Well, it doesn't go into it exactly. So the closest we can get, if you know your multiplication table, we just did this. And remember, we don't ever want to go over our number. Remember, in our steps, I told you beforehand, we want to get as close to our numbers as possible, never going over what we're trying to divide into. 15 is too big, so we don't look here. We go to 10 because that's the closest we can get without going over. So it seems like 2 is our answer. So we put 2 directly on top of our second number because we're focusing on the second number now. So now we look at our second step of multiply. We do 2 times 5, and what does that give you? Well, it gives you 10. And then we do some subtraction. Well, what's 12 minus 10? It's 2, right? So now we've done our subtraction. Let's pull down. And now we got 23. So we have more to work with, right? We just pulled down. So let's go again. Repeat. Our new thing that we're going to be focusing on is 23. How many times does 5 go into 23? Well, if you did your multiplication table again, you know that the closest we can get is 20 without going over. So we put our 4 here. That's the closest we can get, 20. So the result is 5 times 4 gives that 20, so we put the 4 up here. Then we do our multiply. Well, we know 5 times 4 is 20. We just did that here, so we put that below our 23. Now we do our subtracting. We get a 3. Now, do we have anything else to pull down? No, there's nothing else here, right? So if there's nothing else to pull down, we get to the repeat stage. We're done. We only keep going if we have more stuff to pull down. Does 5 go into 3? No. So therefore, this is going to be our remainder. So we take our quotient and we rewrite it. And if you think about this, what does 0 to 4 mean? This is just 24. We can actually drop off the 0. So our answer is going to be 24 with a remainder of 3. Looking at our quotient, 5 can go into 123 24 times. However, it doesn't go exactly into it. 123 is not a multiple of 5. So there is going to be a remainder left over. And we determine that it is 3. So using these steps, divide, multiply, subtract, pull down, and repeat, we can handle long division. And it is not impossible to do without knowing your multiplication table, but you see how it can be a lot easier than having to rely on adding a bunch of numbers over and over and over again to figure out how we're going to multiply and do this division up here. So our question for today is actually going to be a word problem that we're going to be looking through. And I'm going to leave it on screen while I'm reading it to you, so I want you to read it with me. So it says, a game store has 2,540 video games on 4 racks. Each rack holds the same number of video games. How many video games are on each rack? So let's determine, based on that, what is our dividend and what is our divisor. It says we have 2,540 video games, and they're on 4 racks. each rack holds the same number of video games. That is important. What this tells us is this is not going to have a remainder. How many video games are on each rack? So we're trying to figure out how many video games are going to be evenly distributed over the 4 racks. So after reading this, our dividend, the thing that's going to be inside our half box, is going to be 2,540. Our divisor is going to be 4 because we're trying to figure out how many video games are going to be on each of these 4 racks. How are we going to break up 2,540 into 4 separate sets? Now that we know how this is written, let's find our answer, or as we call it, the quotient. First, we start with divide, 2. Does 4 go into 2? We're going to focus on divide, 2. No, right? So we're going to put our 0 here because the closest we can get is this 0 when we multiply. So we've done the first 2 steps. Then we do our subtraction. We got 2, and then we pull down. So now we've done our next 2 steps, and we have 25. All right, we're going to repeat. How many times does 4 go into 25? 25 is what we're going to be dividing now. Well, does it go evenly? No, we're going to get close, but we're not quite going to hit it. But we're going to have this 6 here, right? Because when we get close, we realize that 4 times 6 is going to give us 24. And we don't ever want to go over this number. If you went to 7, well, 7 times 4 will be 28, and that's going to be overshooting this number. We don't ever want to go over. If we can hit the number, great, but we want to get as close as possible. So now we've done our multiplication, we do our subtraction now, and we get 1. Then we pull down, and we get 4 down here. So ultimately we have 14 as our new thing that once we repeat, we're going to try to divide. How many times does 4 go into 14? Well, it doesn't go evenly, but we can get really close. And you see, this is why we really need to know our multiplication table, because 4 times 3 is 12. But if you went to 4 times 4, you notice that 16 is too big, so we don't go that far. 3 times 4 gives us 12, so now we subtract again and we get 2. And now we're done that, and we're on our pull down, so we pull 0 all the way down, and now we have something new to divide. We repeat again. And what we're going to be dividing now is this 20. How many times does 4 go into 20? Well, if you know your multiplication table, that's going to be exactly 5 times. So we put the 5 here, and you notice every time I picked another number to go up here, it's always over the number that we're focusing on. We start from our left and we move towards the right, but every number that goes up top is going over a number that we first looked at. So this 5 here is over the 0 because that's the last number we're focusing on, and 20 minus 20 gives us 0. Remember, I said this is not going to have any remainders. Based on how this looked in our word problem, it goes into it evenly. So our final answer, once we get rid of this 0 here, is going to be 635. Wow, I know that was a lot, but I'm so glad you made it this far. If you have any questions at all, remember you can put them in the comment box below. I'd love to help you as much as I possibly can. If you have questions about your own homework you'd like to see on this channel, remember you can visit me on Facebook at Tutor Me Sempai and tell me all about it there. Don't worry if not everything came to you the first time you watched this video. Take your time, go over it again, and make sure you practice all the steps until you actually get it. If you found this video helpful though, remember to leave a like, it really helps the channel. And while you're at it, hit the notification bell, smash the subscribe button, and share with a friend that can also use the help. Well, that's all the time I have for today. I really hope it's helped with your homework, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again next week. I'm Courtney, and this is another session of Tutor Me Senpai.